Welcome to the Let's Talk Paralegal podcast. It is a pleasure having you on the show, and I am so looking forward to our conversation today. We had a brief conversation before the recording, so I'm sure the audience is going to really relate with the topic that we're going to talk about. And I, again, just thank you for being on, for sure. Pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk with you and talk with your audience.
Oh, thank you so much. So you are an attorney. Let's just start off with that. But none of this is going to be legal advice, or please don't construe as legal advice. This is strictly educational podcast. But you are an attorney, right? And you're stationed in where? I'm sorry, remind me.
I'm physically in Rockland, California right now, which is a suburb of Sacramento.
Ooh, California. Yeah. I don't even know what to say to that. I love California, but I stay away from it as much as possible.
The typical response I get from anybody who's east of us, which you obviously are, is they want to know. They don't ask me now, but they will ask my children, do you serve, how many days, or how often are you, many days of the week are you on the beach, etc. And my children always disappoint them by telling them, we live 100 miles from the coast. We're actually almost equal distance from Reno, Nevada, as we are from San Francisco. So we are amazing at the top of what is called the Central Valley.
Yeah, so it's morning for you then, because we're definitely.
It is morning for me.
You have your coffee. I'm already on my water. Sorry. I'm not there with you yet. I usually have my afternoon coffee, but later on, once the day is almost over, my energy is just about to die at that point.
Understandable.
But today you're going to bring an amazing topic, which I love personally, and I had to learn as well to change my language when it came to that, as far as how I market my business. Again, what we were talking about before was the word pivot, and obviously your feelings about pivot. And I'll let you discuss how you feel about that word in a second, but really about changing the way we think about finances, right? About our financial stability and that process that goes into the actual, I don't want to say it, attitude. So let's just say attitude for the rest of the podcast. But go ahead. I want you to share that story because I think it was very interesting.
Well, thank you. I was sharing that my wife and I have had very different experiences throughout COVID, throughout this last 15 or 16 months. And it has to do with the way we work, but more importantly, the way we think about our work and the way that we have or haven't had to change. My wife has been with the same employer for more than 28 years now. And her day-to-day business, her work day did not change one iota with the pandemic. And that was her business, her company didn't really change with it at all, didn't need to, because they were already set up as being they don't have a brick and mortar store. They're a financial newsletter, so everything is done on phone or online. But for my wife, she had been probably 8-9 years ago, had been able to transition to telecommuting. And so her day still remains get up, walk out into the living room / office that we share, and sign in on her computer and go about her workday. My day has changed drastically. And I've had to adopt a new attitude and be willing to adopt some changes. And the biggest change that has happened for me, I think, is adoption by courts of Zoom or some other remote access. I was saying earlier, and this has become more the norm, is yesterday morning I was sitting here with 2 separate devices bouncing back and forth between two separate courtrooms. And I had to adopt that and adapt to that. When I think about this, I think about one of my friends who I've worked on cases with. We've been what has been referred to more than once as practice partners. And I like to say that we're limited practice partners because
yes, let's get the terminology correct here.
we pick and choose what cases we will work on together. But this man is in his 70s, and I get after him almost every time we speak because what I hear from him is I didn't get that done because I didn't have my assistant here to do it. Mm. And I know for a fact that he has not adapted any Zoom or Zoom type technology for court, for client meetings, for any of those things. And right. As a result, his practice, in speaking with him, his practice has suffered over this last 15 months. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say that my practice has bloomed and really taken off during this time, but as you can see by my appearance, I'm not exactly looking, I'm not a newbie to this and looking for my practice to bloom, but my practice has stayed constant. And part of that has been due to the fact that I'm able to use technology and not just the Zoom technology with courts or with depositions. I have a deposition scheduled tomorrow that we will have, I think, 6 attorneys in 6 different locations throughout the state of California. And I don't even know where our witness is going to physically be, but we will all be on screen. We will all have the ability to participate and all have the ability to be there, regardless of the fact that we're not in the same room, which a year and a half ago, it was travel to wherever the witness is, all 6 attorneys. Or, yes. So that's one of the best examples of adapting and changing with the changing times to be able to keep practice not just afloat, but to be able to be productive and effective at it.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like we have to roll with the punches at this point, right? There's just no other way of saying it. And, for lack of better words, sorry, I'm not that eloquent right now. But definitely what the pandemic has taught us as in general in the legal industry is that we need to learn to adapt. I mean, I remember as a paralegal full time, before I opened up my freelance, I remember myself, like it was yesterday, both the attorney and I were pregnant at the time with our first child. And we were like, probably we were almost at the same time. So it was like 4 months, 5 months pregnant. So yeah, we had our bellies. Right. We were carrying these boxes. Like it was ridiculous. And we're going to these trials and these hearings that we have to do. And it was just madness. And then I still work with her now because she opened up her own practice, and we always joke about that one time where we're both like with our bellies out with these huge boxes rolling everywhere, and it was just really a disaster at that point, but we made it happen, and we learned how to roll with the punches. So regardless if it's physical labor or tech labor, whatever it is, we have to make it happen, right? We have to make it work in order for the case to get to where it needs to get to, for the client to get the legal representation that they hire you for, in order for the legal industry to continue. Like we can't just shut down. The legal industry doesn't work that way. We can't just shut courts down, and like it was madhouse when the courts were like, no, we're not opening. We're like, what are you talking about? You're not opening. Right. These cases can't just sit here for a year, 2 years. We don't know how long this is going to be, until finally legislators were like, no, you can't do that. Like, that's not how this works. So yeah, that was all scary for a little bit, but we finally made it work, and they passed the administrative orders that needed to be passed in order to be able to attend, hearings virtually and mediations and depositions and things that we always used to argue about, right?
Right.
Because this technology, just case on point, let's just be full transparency here. This technology has always been around. We've always had technology or the ability to take depositions virtually, to do mediations, arbitrations virtually. It was always trying to see, why not? Why can't this person fly in? Why can't it be here? The case jurisdiction is here. It was always those little arguments. And now what the pandemic has said is like, forget all that. Like, we're not even, I'm not, we're not, it is what it is. We've been doing this for a year. Let's just continue to do it, right? And if we need to, if it needs to be in person due to some type of disability or undue influence or some actual legal necessity, kind of like the whole dispute about remote notary, right? With the will and estate, signings and things like that, that's going to be a whole different ballgame. And we're going to see new litigation on that as well, because that is something that is unknown to us. Were they undue influence? All you can see is this little box. You can't see anything else. So how can you really testify or notarize that this person wasn't being, influenced or anything of that sort? But having said all that, how do you feel is the best way, right? Like, how did you learn how to do all of this? Because it sounds to me like you weren't like the biggest expert, right? But did you like take some training videos, or did you reach out to colleagues? Like, would love to know how you learned all of this, because I'm sure the audience is also wondering.
I have to admit that most of what I've learned on Zoom, and it's still a limited knowledge. I mean, my knowledge fits in probably about this parameters, and I know that the capabilities are many, many times over that. My first experience with Zoom was a court in 2 counties over, and I got a notice for my upcoming hearing status conference that got an email invite to attend by Zoom. And it had the link in there, just like you send out, like any of us can send out. And then I had to take a half hour or so the day before to make sure that I was signed up with Zoom and make sure that I could get on properly, figure out how to make sure that I'm only showing what I want to show on camera. Right. My children repeatedly tease me about, are they seeing your knees, Dad? And and it's like, no, if I'm going to be on camera, I don't need to be, I know what needs to be seen or what I would like to be seen, as opposed to that. So it's been hit and miss to some extent. And it's also been observing others, because shortly after that first court hearing, I had to attend a deposition, and we were doing it by Zoom. And in fact, we did several over last summer. I probably attended half a dozen depositions by Zoom. And each time I observed who was, how things were working there. I had one opposing counsel who I don't know what device he was using, but we would suddenly be looking out the window, see the view out his window. Then we would see the view of his credenza. Then we would see the view under his desk. And, it wasn't, it wasn't anything inappropriate, but at the same time, it tended to be distracting. So it just reminded me that I have designated a spot. It may not be the very best spot in my house, may not be the most photogenic, but I've designated a spot where I know that it's fairly quiet. It's apart, I'm on the other end of the house from my wife in her office. And it's become my satellite office, so to speak, because this is where if I'm going to appear by Zoom or I'm going to have a long phone call, this is where I end up. So that I'm not in her way, she's not in my way, but also that I can limit the distraction, whatever distractions that there might be. She has a little dog, much to the dog's dismay. I close the door before she can come in. And that's in part because I deal with a tribal court in further north in California, and the judge, almost every time we've had a hearing, she's had to excuse herself for a minute because the dogs are in the room. And it's
wow.
not, and it's not that the
Oh,
dogs,
I never knew that. So the judges are not in the courthouse. They're doing it from their office as well? Or some?
Some of them. It's
Okay.
it is true. I found out early on that
I mean, obviously I wouldn't experience that. I'm a paralegal.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like this insight now.
what I found very early on was that it's very much a judge by judge.
Just like anything else, right? That's why we have judicial procedures.
Yeah, I mean, I've been physically in the last 15 months, I have physically gone into 4 different courthouses.
Wow.
On 4 different occasions. And one of those courthouses, I had to call the clerk and say, before I went, I'm just double checking because I don't see on, I see this information on the website about attending hearings in this courthouse by phone and or video.
Mm-hmm.
But your judge, seems to have a different meaning. And she just said, this particular judge wanted people to show up in person, period.
Ah, okay.
You will show up, we were masked, there were plexiglass shields, there was socially distancing, but that judge chose to do that. Down the hall from that judge was another judge who I don't know if he's been back in his courtroom yet, because I've done probably 3 or 4 different hearings with him, and the clerk has let me know initially she was the only one in the courtroom. The judge was calling in from his home office or wherever he happened to be, and the parties, myself and the other attorney, we were in our own places, wherever we chose to be, and we were able to function quite
right. Do you feel like these virtual hearings and these virtual depositions and everything being virtual, do you see as an attorney, right? Do you see that as expediting the case, or is it easier, or what are your thoughts on this? Because we all know it's not going away. I mean, I'm sure a lot of attorneys have tasted the fruits and would like to continue to bear it, as that one judge example you just provided. So as an attorney, do you feel like your cases are going smoother, or is it even fixing certain things? I would love your input.
Well, it does have some real benefits. And an attorney and I were discussing that the other day, as we both had in-person hearings in the courthouse and then had gone and found our way to what is in that courthouse is called the Attorney Convenience Center to make video appearances in other courts. And his comment to me was, this has really cut down on my windshield time and I love it. And I've said the same thing. I've had judges in different courts talk about that they are having discussions among the judges whether or not they're going to continue and adopt, the remote systems permanently. And a couple of courts in our area have actually, the presiding judges come out and said, yes, this will be from here going forward for certain things.
Right, yeah, especially for like those 5-minute hearings or 10-minute, small motions.
It's much more, I find it much more efficient. I find, and I have clients who say, oh, I'd much rather have you there in person. Well, I'm sorry, but the judge is seeing me more clearly on this video than he is from the bench when I'm standing 30 feet away behind a counsel table.
Sure.
I think he really is. And in a lot of those instances, they're judges that I've already dealt with for years. They know my face. They know who I am. It doesn't, to me, it doesn't, I wouldn't think it makes a bit of difference whether I'm there in person or on video. And it does, it's especially been effective for, like you say, those 5-minute hearings. I sat on between those two Zoom yesterday for an hour for a 5-minute hearing in each of those courts. 5 minutes as to my matter.
For you, yes.
Yeah,
right.
But the calendar was that long in each court, and if I'd been there in person, then I would have had to drive the hour back. I have a court where I've told people that Zoom has given me 3 hours.
Their
back.
Cost, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of attorneys that charge the hour, like the entire 3-4 hours that it takes them to go to the court, to do this, to do that, they charge the entire time. So I've seen a lot of clients, kind of benefit from that, knowing that their attorney no longer has to drive anywhere. They'll only get charged the hour, 2 hours, or however long they were in the court, waiting for the court.
Right. It's, and so it's more efficient. I think it's just as effective, if not more effective, than being in person. I get, and I get to hear, I have to pay attention when I'm on Zoom, whereas in person, I might not be paying as much attention because I've got to at least have one ear saying, has my name or my case name come up? And, and judges have learned, at least the judges I do with, have learned that when they call a case, they need to give us a moment so that we can find the unmute button and bring up our video or whatever we need to do to be there in court. And that's, again, a lot faster and more effective than, well, bailiff, would you go check in the hallway if Mr. Solomon's waiting out there for some reason? When we're in person, happens a lot. I had that happen, in fact, last week at an in-person hearing where I had to go out and make a call while waiting for my matter to be called. And, in that instance, my case wasn't called while I was out, but it very well could have been. So it was not just a matter of timing on it.
Right. And it's not like, like we were saying, it might be a 5-minute hearing for you, but the judge has all these other 5 minutes, right? So you could be there all day. And I don't think, and honestly, I don't think the clients understand that, but it's just it says here 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and we're like, yes, but so are the other 100 attorneys waiting, for their 5 minute, 10 minute.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times I've had to explain that to clients, especially when they're, it's bill for time, like when you're actually billing for the attorney's time and trying to justify everything that's on the invoice. Like, we're just going to throw stuff on there for no reason, but whatever, it is what it is. So, I know I've had to do that, and I've seen the difference between the billing and all that, and talking about finances and everything. I'm sure that's also, kind of like you're used to certain things, and then all of a sudden that's not what it is. So how have you been able to manage that portion of it, right? Because now you're billing and the way your retainer, all this has changed, or have you kind of kept it the same?
My services agreement has not changed. I still, each of my agreements is tailored somewhat to the client that I'm dealing with. I mean, I have a corporate client that has got 2 different billing rates, depending on what, one for actual court time or work on a case, another for travel time. And so what's happened with the pandemic is I may have only traveled, I've traveled probably 10% in this last 14 months of what I had done the prior year for them. So that
Okay.
that travel rate hasn't completely gone away. And I wouldn't, and because there are certain things that have to be in person, I felt that there wasn't a need to amend that. The same with individual clients is that and individual clients, I generally have one rate. This is services provided, work done. And so I haven't had to worry about that really. Just trying to keep track. The more interesting part of that is that now I'm able to be in 2 different courts at the same time. So how do if both of them take the same amount of time, then I can just split that for the client as opposed to a true double billing on it, which I suppose could be done also, but it hasn't really affected that part for me very much.
That's good. I mean, that's awesome. That's good to know because a lot of people don't really know how to manage that. Again, another thing, right? Another change in your attitude and another learning curve.
When I started my practice, I went out as a solo because I was older. I was 40 when I graduated from law school, so and it took me a couple of times to pass the California bar. And so I was in my 40s already.
No judgment.
And I needed to, so I went out on my own. And part of what I was able to do, though, by going out on my own was I already had a network of attorneys that I had somewhat established while I was in law school and looking for ways to work in the legal field. And that led me to dealing with firms from across the state. And in fact, I dealt with some firms from, across country. I had a case several years ago where I dealt with a firm out of your neck of the woods, out of Florida. And those things forced me from the beginning of my practice to embrace things like email, scanned documents. I have tried to be in the practice of scanning documents when they come in because it's much easier to have them electronic. And in fact, I just recently, I can't say replaced because I still have my multifunction.
Physical files?
I still have the physical file. I think I will always have the physical file, but I was going to say I replaced my previous multifunction printer device, printer, etc. And I didn't really replace it. I just pushed it into another location to keep using it because it still works. But I upgraded to a better, to a newer printer scanner, so that I can just because I felt that it was time. But I'm looking right now, I just met with a client yesterday picking up discovery responses. And she handed me a 2-inch thick pile of documents. And I'm sitting here thinking today, my thought today has been about scanning those documents because there are 4 attorneys on the other side. All those different defendants, and trying to make the decision of, am I going to send a physical copy plus electronic copy to the requesting attorney, while everybody else who I owe copies doing it just electronically. And I had a little discussion of that with the client also because she said, I have photos. What do I do about photos? What do I do for you for photos? And I said, are they digital or are they film? And I'm talking with her yesterday. I let her know I can't remember the last time I used film. And so she said, oh, they're digital. I said, well, great, put them on a flash drive. So, instead of having to either use my color copier or go color copy, 70 photos, I'm I'm today or tomorrow going to go pick up, some flash drives to, at a minimum, give everybody the photos on the flash drive. So
Yeah.
that, and that's a technology that's been around for the last,
Ever.
well, when I went to work in a law office 30 years ago, it did not exist.
Ah.
And I can say that with certainty because I was still in my undergrad and
Didn't we have those floppy disks before the drive? I remember those.
Yeah. In fact, I took my one and only computer class that year, and we were using a 2 floppy disk boot up system, which you wouldn't even be aware of how that worked. And
I just learned about the tickler system the other day.
Oh,
I didn't know what that was either.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
My generation started with the typewriter. That I did know because I had one at home and we had the typewriter.
Somebody once asked me why it took me so long to become an attorney and to decide to become an attorney. And I can point to the typewriter and tell them why. I mean, I've had the conversation over the years with older attorneys, and I've asked them as we've been running to, through the office to meet a deadline, and ask them, what did you used to do before we had computers where we could cut and paste and do spell check and, all of those things.
Scan everything, put it in a Dropbox or put it in a, electronic drive.
And their response was to point to a typewriter and talk to me about carbon paper. Now, I'm old enough to know about carbons and making carbon copies, but they talked about all the overtime that they had to pay their staff and how it took that. And so I'd look at that and say, look, I wasn't willing to do that. I came into this field when we at least had, my first computer was a 486 PC. And it had gone from the dual floppy disk boot up to a single floppy disk. Oh man,
this is reminding me of like the AOL dial-up, that horrible sound that it used to make.
All of those things.
You want to have a phone line in order to have internet. Jeez.
Exactly, but the technology has progressed, and it's not just the large firms that can adopt it and use it. I was told 30 years ago by that first attorney I worked for that he went to a continuing education seminar for 3 or 4 days. And the one thing that he came back from it with was a session on technology by a software developer who was touting his product that was one of the early, and I can't even remember which one it was, but was one of the early legal software products, and was, and that attorney could see and was talking to me about, Lyle, don't be like me. And I says, well, what do you mean? You have a Ferrari, you have this very successful practice. And what he was pointing to was that he also had a support staff of 7. That he had 3 people typing to get things out. And he said to me more than once, the technology is coming, if it's not already here, that you could do as large of a practice on your own without support staff as I do with these 7 individuals. And so I'm still not there. I know I'm still not there, but I have adopted a lot of that technology, and this last year has forced not just me, but a lot of others who were resisting some of the technology to adopt more of it. In California, one of the first things we saw happen when our governor did our shutdown order at the end of March 2020 was the legislature passed an emergency bill that said you're no longer required to do in-person or mail service of pleadings, etc., between law firms, between counsel on a case. You are to do email, and gave us some specific instructions how that email service would happen. And I know a couple of attorneys that, like my friend, that was really hard for him, and it would have been impossible for him if he didn't have a competent legal assistant at the time. And yet I know other firms that it was just like about time that we were able to do this.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, in Florida we've had that forever, so we didn't even need to have that passed.
Well, an email was an option prior to that. And in fact, I think about a year before COVID hit, the legislature finally, they passed a revised statute that finally said you could, if an attorney listed his email address on pleadings, then you could use, that was an invitation to do service by email. But prior to that revised statute, the statute said, if you want to do email service, you must have specific agreement from the party you're serving that they will accept by email. And I more than once disputed service of something because I was, I had clients who didn't want me to accept anything by email. And so this last year, I get to say to those clients, I'm sorry that you don't want me to accept by email, but the statute says I have to. I must. And in fact, the other change to that was it went from a choice of putting your email address on pleadings or not, to now it's you must put. I got reminded last year, shortly after it passed, by an opposing counsel that I didn't have my email address on a pleading, and it was now a requirement. I mentioned that my first experience with Zoom was getting an email from the court. I had a conversation with the court clerk shortly after that, who said, yeah, things were slow enough. We were looking up email addresses for attorneys. We're almost back to full speed now. So we're no longer looking up email addresses. So if you want an email from the court, you'll fill out the proper form and send it to us. So it's, that's, I think, a positive change in that you have, and it's a change that's going to continue going forward.
Oh, absolutely. I think technology is not going to stop there. And
oh no.
And to your point about technology and how it's progressing, I remember when we used to do trials back 18 years ago versus now in the courts, where we had these big projectors, where you had you had to put like clear sheets on, and especially with personal injury. Yes, with the personal injury cases, especially with the diagrams and everything that you have to, you're basically, the jury are just, not just, but they're lay persons, right? They're not, most of them are not medical providers. They're not going to understand all the terminology, legal or medical, that you're presenting to them. So you literally have to paint them a picture and really make it to the point where anyone can understand what you're trying to present, right? Because how else are they going to make a proper decision? And how else are you going to do just to your client? So I remember, when I first started, we had these big projectors, and the court usually had the minimal, right? Like the basics. If you were lucky. If not, you had to bring everything with you. You had to either pay somebody to bring everything and transport all the, documentations and exhibits and diagrams and all these fancies. It looked like we were going to Hollywood or something. Like, seriously, it looked like a full-on production. And I know I worked really for a long time with a really well-known personal injury litigator, and he was one of the best personal injury litigators I have ever worked with. Until this day, I still do some projects for him, but he was the best at trials. Like talk about painting a picture. This guy had technology down to a T, and he had adapters because he knew that the court didn't have that certain outlet. So he had these little converters and these little things, like, you name it, whatever technology came out, he already had bought it, because he was like, I'm not letting anybody stop me from presenting what I need to present and do just to my client. So And like you said, there's some attorneys that are on top of it, or some of them are even ahead, because I've even seen attorneys have their files in an iPad or like a tablet, right, with a little filing system, and their exhibits pop up and they screen it up. And so I've seen that, and it really aged. I'm not gonna be prejudiced because the ages, it didn't matter. It was really just who the person was and how innovative they were and stuff like that. Because I've had attorneys from both sides of the spectrum be at both sides of the spectrum. So it didn't matter what the age was or gender, because male or female. It really just was how eager, right, or how like geeky they were when it came to technology. Really, that's really what it was. It all had to do with personality. And I've had firms that are stuck on their ways and just have physical files and only use the case management for information purposes. They don't even scan information, documents in there. It's just to have like a Rolodex, virtual Rolodex. Really, that's what it was. And I've had attorneys that don't have physical files at all, other than originals, if they're like mortgage or title, and they had a whole safe and all fireproof room and all that for those. So I mean, I've worked with, you name it, 18 years. I've pretty much have worked with every type of attorney there is out there, both the good, the bad, the ugly, the pretty, whatever. But definitely I have to say, it's the way or the trajectory of how the firm goes is how the attorney chooses, right? They're the ones that run the environment of the law firm. So whether it's going to be all physical files, whether it's going to be virtual, whether it's going to be everything digital, whether evidence is going to be presented on a screen versus on a physical 3D printer, or whatever the case may be, it all has to do with how the attorney feels comfortable in presenting, because at the end of the day, that's their job. Their job is to present the case, present the argument, argue. That's really what it is. And the support staff is just there to do just that: support them, help them, get them to where they need to be so that the case can be presented the way they want it. But yeah, this has been an awesome conversation, and I love everything that you brought to the table, and I thank you for your time, because I know it's super valuable. And thank you for being on today and for giving us, I guess, a different perspective, right? Because most of my legal professionals are in the support team staff, or if they do, if they are attorneys, they don't do litigation. So, we never got that inside scoop of the virtual trials and everything else. So I thank you for that. And I thank you for your time, and, keep doing what you're doing, keep learning. Right? That's the best part of all this.
Yeah, no, that is one. I decided about the time I graduated from law school that I might have adult onset ADD, because I couldn't stay focused on, wasn't always able to work at a job for very long without getting bored by it. And that is part of the appeal of being an attorney, is that I could stay and do one thing and and absolutely never have to learn but very little new at all. But at the same time, being in this field, I can learn something new every day if I want to.
Right.
And I
absolutely
learn, and that's, to me, been and is one of the most exciting things about working as an attorney, is that I can choose whether I learn new things or not. And, like I say, some of the things I'm forced to. Technology, this last year has forced a lot of people to either learn it and embrace it, or retire, go find something else to do because they don't want to learn. But it to me has been a very attractive thing to all throughout, and this last year has been no different in that regard. So thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it, and hopefully been able to share something of value to you and those who will listen and view this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Lyle. Again, all his information will be on the descriptions of both the podcast and the YouTube. And thank you again for being on the Let's Talk Paralegal podcast.
Thank you too.